Captain Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of Kepler Station, watching his ship float in the dark space beyond. The USS Defiance looked nothing like the sleek alien vessels surrounding it, where the other ships had smooth curves and gleaming surfaces. His ship had sharp angles and thick metal plates. It looked rough and unfinished compared to the beautiful alien warships. Morrison felt proud of his ship, but he could see the looks on the alien faces around him. They were not impressed. Some were even laughing behind their hands or whatever they used for hands. The Galactic Military Exposition happened every 5 years. Species from across the galaxy came to show off their newest weapons and ships. This year, Earth had finally been invited to join. Morrison had been chosen to represent humanity's latest achievement in space warfare. Dr. Lisa Grant walked up beside him. She had spent 10 years designing the Defiance's systems. Her hands shook slightly as she watched the alien delegates pointing at their ship. "They don't understand what they're looking at," she said quietly. Morrison nodded. "Maybe that's for the best." The main presentation hall was enormous. Thousands of beings from dozens of species filled the seats. Morrison had never seen so many different kinds of aliens in one place. Some looked almost human, while others were so strange he couldn't figure out how they moved or breathed. Ambassador Zethkar of the Hegemony Empire was the first to speak about the human ship. He was tall and thin, with gray skin and 4 arms. His voice carried easily through the hall. "The humans have brought us their latest creation," he said, his voice dripping with amusement. "They call it a warship, but it looks more like a flying scrapyard to me." Laughter rippled through the audience. Morrison felt his face grow hot, but he kept his expression calm. Zethkar continued, "Look at those thick metal plates bolted all over the hull. Do they think more armor will make up for their lack of proper technology? And those weapons, so crude and simple. It's almost cute how hard they're trying." More laughter filled the hall. Morrison glanced at Dr. Grant, whose face had gone pale. The Vesperian delegates were next. They were beautiful creatures with silver skin and graceful movements. Their ships looked like works of art, all flowing lines and glowing energy fields. "We appreciate the humans' efforts," the lead Vesperian said in a musical voice. "But their engineering is so basic. They use physical armor instead of energy shields. They mount weapons on the outside instead of integrating them into the hull design. It's like watching children play with toy blocks." The Nexus Collective representative was a machine intelligence that spoke through a floating metal sphere. Its voice was cold and emotionless. "Analysis complete," it announced. "Human vessel shows primitive construction methods. Technology level approximately 200 standard years behind current galactic standards. Threat assessment, minimal. Recommendation, ignore." Morrison stood up from his seat. The hall grew quiet as thousands of eyes, sensors, and other sensing organs focused on him. "Would you like to see what our ship can actually do?" he asked. General Crixthon of the Hegemony military leaned back in his seat. He was even larger than Ambassador Zethkar, with scars covering his gray skin. His 4 arms were crossed, and his expression showed pure contempt. "We've seen enough," he said. "Your ship is exactly what we expected from humans, big, clumsy, and desperate. You bolt on more armor because you can't build proper shields. You mount bigger guns because you don't understand energy efficiency. It's the same story with every primitive species that joins the galactic community." Morrison felt Commander Ryan Phillips tense beside him. Phillips was young and eager, and Morrison could see he wanted to argue back. Morrison put a calming hand on his shoulder. "Our ship has some unique features," Morrison said carefully. "Systems that work differently than traditional designs." "Unique?" Zethkar laughed. "Is that what you call it when your technology doesn't work properly?" The alien audience erupted in laughter again. Morrison sat back down, his jaw clenched tight. Dr. Grant whispered to him, "They have no idea what they're looking at. The modular armor system, the adaptive weapons, the quantum drives, none of them understand how any of it works." "Maybe we should show them," Phillips said quietly. Morrison shook his head. "Not here. Not like this." The presentation continued for another hour. Each species showed off their latest weapons and ships. The hegemony revealed a new plasma cannon that could melt through a mile of solid rock. The Vesperians displayed energy, shields that could deflect any known weapon. The Nexus Collective demonstrated a targeting system that never missed. When it was Earth's turn, Morrison kept his presentation short. He talked about the Defiance's armor plating, its weapon systems, and its engines. He didn't mention the special features that Dr. Grant had built into every system. He didn't talk about the learning algorithms or the adaptive combat protocols. He certainly didn't mention the ship's ability to interface with human intuition and creativity. The aliens listened politely, but Morrison could see they weren't taking any of it seriously. To them, humanity was just another primitive species trying to play with the big kids. After the presentation, several trade delegations that had been negotiating with Earth suddenly canceled their meetings. 3 species that had been considering defense contracts with humanity decided to look elsewhere. The exposition that was supposed to showcase human achievement had become a demonstration of human inadequacy. As the aliens filed out of the hall, Morrison heard fragments of their conversations. Typical human overconfidence. They actually think that thing could fight our ships. Primitive species always think bigger is better. Morrison, Phillips, and Dr. Grant stood alone in the emptying hall. Around them, alien crews were packing up their displays and preparing to leave. "Sir," Phillips said, "we could have shown them what the Defiance can really do." Morrison looked at his young officer. "Ryan, sometimes it's better to be underestimated." Dr. Grant nodded slowly. They looked at our ship and saw everything they expected to see. Crude human engineering, primitive human thinking. They never looked deeper. "Maybe that's our advantage," Morrison said. "They think they know what we're capable of. They think they understand how we fight. But they don't understand humans at all." The 3 humans left the hall together, walking past displays of alien technology that could destroy planets or bend space itself. But none of those technologies could do what Dr. Grant had built into the Defiance. None of them could learn, adapt, and grow stronger with each battle. As they walked back to their ship, Morrison wondered if the aliens would still be laughing when they met the USS Defiance in actual combat. He had a feeling they would find out soon enough. 6 months had passed since the embarrassing day at Kepler Station. Captain Morrison tried not to think about it, but the memory still stung. Earth's reputation in the galaxy had gotten even worse after the exposition. Several alien species had canceled trade deals. Others had stopped taking human diplomatic calls altogether. Morrison was in his quarters aboard the USS Defiance when the emergency alert came through. The ship's communications officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster, appeared on his screen looking worried. "Captain, we're getting reports from the outer colonies," she said. "The Hegemony Empire has started attacking human settlements." Morrison felt his stomach drop. He had been expecting this news, but it still hit him hard. "How many colonies?" 3 so far, sir. New Austin, Terra Nova, and Highland Station. All of them fell within hours. Morrison hurried to the bridge. "Commander." Phillips was already there studying the tactical displays. The screens showed red marks where human colonies had been attacked. More red marks were moving toward other human worlds. "What's our fleet status?" Morrison asked. Phillips shook his head grimly. "Admiral Parker deployed everything we have. 12 cruisers and 30 smaller ships. They engaged the hegemony forces at New Austin." Morrison waited for the rest of the report, but Phillips's expression told him everything he needed to know. "We lost 8 ships," Phillips continued. "The others had to retreat. The hegemony weapons are just too powerful. Our shields can't stop. They're plasma cannons." On Earth, President Kate Williams was meeting with her military advisors. Admiral Chris Parker sat at the conference table, his face showing the weight of defeat. The reports from the outer colonies were getting worse by the hour. "How many civilians did we evacuate?" President Williams asked. "About 60% from New Austin," Admiral Parker replied. "Maybe 40% from Terra Nova. Highland Station, we didn't get there in time." The room fell silent. Highland Station had been home to 50,000 people. "What about our defenses here in the core systems?" the president asked. Admiral Parker looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, If the hegemony brings their full fleet to Earth, we can't stop them. Our ships are brave, but they're outgunned. The hegemony dreadnoughts are each the size of a small city. They have weapons that can crack planets. President Williams stared at the tactical display showing hegemony forces moving deeper into human space. What are our options? We can evacuate more civilians, Admiral Parker said. We can make the hegemony fight for every system, but in the end, we don't have the technology to match them. Meanwhile, General Crixthon was aboard his flagship, the Vengeance, leading the hegemony attack force. His forearms moved quickly over the control panels as he studied the battle reports. The human resistance had been even weaker than he expected. The humans are running like scared animals, his aide reported. Their ships flee as soon as they see us coming. Crixthon smiled, showing sharp teeth. Perfect. I want to make an example of these primitive creatures. The whole galaxy needs to see what happens when inferior species try to play at war. He remembered the human captain from the exposition 6 months ago. Morrison. That was his name. And that ugly prototype ship they had been so proud of. Crixthon had laughed at it then, and he was still laughing now. General, his aide said, we've identified the location of the human prototype vessel. The USS Defiance is currently at Earth's orbital shipyards. Crixthon's smile grew wider. Excellent. I want that ship destroyed personally. It will be fitting revenge for their pathetic display at Kepler Station. Back on Earth, Dr. Lisa Grant was working frantically in her laboratory. The Defiance's systems were almost ready, but she needed more time. The ship's learning algorithms were still being calibrated. The adaptive combat protocols were untested. Most importantly, the interface between the ship's systems and human neural patterns was still experimental. How much longer do you need? Morrison asked her. Dr. Grant looked up from her work, her eyes red from lack of sleep. The basic systems are ready. The ship can fight. But the advanced features, the ones that make it truly special, I need at least another month. We might not have another month, Morrison said gently. Dr. Grant nodded. She had been watching the news reports like everyone else. Hegemony forces were advancing on multiple fronts. Human colonies were falling one after another. The evacuation, ships were packed with refugees fleeing toward Earth. There's something else, she said. The ship's systems are designed to work with human crews. Not just any humans, but people who can think creatively under pressure. People who can adapt quickly to new situations. Morrison understood what she meant. The Defiance wasn't just a warship. It was a weapon designed specifically for the human way of fighting. Admiral Parker's voice came over the base communications system. All senior officers report to the briefing room immediately. Morrison and Dr. Grant hurried to the meeting. When they arrived, they found Admiral Parker standing before a large tactical display. The screen showed hegemony forces moving toward the inner human systems. The situation is critical, Admiral Parker announced. Hegemony General Crixthon is leading a battle group directly toward Earth. 5 heavy cruisers and 2 dreadnoughts. Enough firepower to destroy our entire home fleet. Murmurs of concern filled the room. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Sir, Morrison said, the USS Defiance is ready for deployment. Admiral Parker looked at him with sad eyes. Jake, I know you believe in your ship, but one experimental vessel against an entire hegemony battle group? It's suicide. With respect, sir, Morrison replied. It's what we trained for. Dr. Grant stepped forward. Admiral, the Defiance isn't like our other ships. It's designed to fight differently, to think differently. Admiral Parker was quiet for a long moment. Around the room, other officers waited for his decision. Outside, Earth's orbital defenses were preparing for a battle they couldn't win. The hegemony expects us to fight like we always have, Morrison said. Ship against ship, weapon against weapon. But what if we don't fight their way? What if we fight like humans? Admiral Parker studied the tactical display. The red marks representing hegemony forces were getting closer to Earth every hour. Soon they would arrive and the battle for humanity's survival would begin. All right, Jake, Admiral Parker said finally. Take the Defiance and intercept them. But I want you to know, you'll probably be going to your deaths. Morrison nodded grimly. Sir, somebody has to show the galaxy that humans don't give up easily. Within hours, the USS Defiance was leaving Earth's orbital shipyards. Morrison's crew of 200 volunteers knew they were likely flying to their deaths, but none of them had hesitated to volunteer. They were tired of being seen as weak and primitive. They were ready to show the galaxy what humans could really do. As Earth fell behind them, Morrison looked at the tactical display showing General Crixthon's approaching fleet. Soon, they would find out if Dr. Grant's revolutionary designs could really change the course of the war. Soon they would discover whether human creativity and adaptability could overcome superior alien technology. The USS Defiance flew toward its destiny, carrying with it humanity's last hope and their greatest secret. The USS Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the Centauri Junction, a busy crossroads where several space lanes met. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge, looking at the tactical display that showed 7 massive hegemony warships waiting for them. Well, Commander Phillips said quietly, at least we found them. Morrison nodded. General Crixthon's battle group was exactly where intelligence had predicted. 2 enormous dreadnoughts floated in the center, each one 3 times the size of the Defiance. Around them, 5 heavy cruisers formed a protective circle. They're not even trying to hide, Lieutenant Foster reported from the communications station. I'm picking up their command signals. They're discussing the best way to destroy us quickly. Morrison smiled grimly. Let them think this will be easy. On the hegemony flagship Vengeance, General Crixthon was indeed planning a quick victory. He stood before his tactical display, his 4 arms moving as he pointed out positions to his officers. The human ship is primitive and slow, he told them. We'll surround it and destroy it with concentrated plasma fire. The battle should be over in minutes. His weapons officer looked concerned. General, shouldn't we study their ship first? Learn about their capabilities? Crixthon laughed harshly. What capabilities? We saw their pathetic prototype at Kepler Station. It's nothing but thick armor and crude weapons. There's nothing to learn. Back on the Defiance, Dr. Grant was in the engineering section, making final adjustments to her systems. Her hands moved quickly over the control panels as she activated programs that had never been tested in real combat. Lisa, Morrison's voice came over the intercom. We're about to engage. Are your systems ready? Dr. Grant took a deep breath. As ready as they'll ever be, Jake. Remember, the ship will start learning from the moment the first shot is fired. Don't try to fight like a normal warship. Let the Defiance show you what it can do. The battle began exactly as General Crixthon had planned. His 5 cruisers spread out in a wide circle around the human ship, while the 2 dreadnoughts moved into position for the killing blow. Bright green plasma beams lanced out from multiple directions, all aimed at the USS Defiance. Morrison watched the incoming fire on his display. Here we go, he said. The plasma beams struck the Defiance's hull with tremendous force. Any normal ship would have been vaporized instantly. Instead, something amazing happened. The Defiance's modular armor plating began to shift and move. Metal plates slid across the hull, spreading and dispersing the energy from the plasma beams. Where the armor couldn't absorb the damage, sections detached completely, carrying the destructive energy away from the ship. Impossible, Crixthon whispered, as he watched his weapons fail to destroy the human vessel. But the real surprise was yet to come. Lieutenant Foster was watching her targeting computer with growing amazement. Captain, the system is learning their firing patterns. It's predicting where they'll shoot next. Morrison looked at his tactical display. Red lines showed where the hegemony ships were aiming. Blue lines showed where the Defiance's computer thought they would aim next. The blue lines were getting more accurate with each passing second. How is this possible? Commander Phillips asked. Dr. Grant's voice came over the intercom. The ship's systems are analyzing every shot fired at us. They're learning how hegemony weapons work, how their targeting systems think, even how their crews make decisions. The more they shoot at us, the better we get at avoiding them. The hegemony ships fired again, but this time the Defiance was ready. The human ship twisted and rolled, its armor plates shifting to deflect the plasma beams. Several shots missed, completely. General Crixthon was no longer smiling. Increase fire rate. Overwhelm their defenses. But increasing the fire rate only gave the Defiance's systems more data to work with. The ship began moving in ways that seemed impossible, dodging attacks that should have been unavoidable. Then the USS Defiance began to fight back, and the real shock began. Instead of trying to match the hegemony ships shot for shot, the human vessel did something completely unexpected. It targeted the cruiser furthest from the group and began firing at non-critical systems. "They're shooting at our sensor array," the cruiser's captain reported, "and our communication equipment, but they're avoiding our weapons and engines." Morrison watched as his ship's weapons systematically disabled the cruiser's ability to see and communicate, but left it able to fight and flee. The enemy crew was alive but helpless, floating in space while their ship's systems failed one by one. "Why aren't they destroying us?" the cruiser captain asked over the emergency channel. That was exactly the question General Crixthon was asking himself. The human ship could have destroyed the cruiser easily, but instead it was playing with it like a cat with a mouse. "Sir," his aide said nervously, "the human ship is broadcasting something." "Put it on speakers," Crixthon ordered. Strange sounds filled the hegemony flagship's bridge. Music, unlike anything the aliens had ever heard. Jazz music, with wild improvisation, and chaotic rhythms that seemed to follow no logical pattern. "What is this noise?" Crixthon demanded. The music was affecting his crew in ways he didn't understand. Their movements became less coordinated. Their tactical thinking seemed confused. The logical patterns that hegemony military training depended on were being disrupted by the chaotic human sounds. Meanwhile, the Defiance had moved on to its second target. This time, instead of disabling systems, it began deploying holographic projections. Suddenly, there appeared to be 3 human ships instead of 1. "Which one is real?" a hegemony weapons officer asked. "All sensors show different readings," came the reply. "I can't tell." The false images weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. They just had to create confusion and doubt. The hegemony crews, trained to fight logically and efficiently, found themselves second-guessing every decision. Dr. Grant's voice came over the Defiance's intercom again. "Jake, the psychological warfare protocols are working better than I hoped. Their crews are making mistakes because they can't understand what we're doing." Morrison was beginning to understand his ship's true power. It wasn't just the adaptive armor or the learning weapon systems. It was the ability to fight in a way that alien minds couldn't comprehend. "Amy," he said to Lieutenant Foster, "target the 3rd cruiser, but this time I want you to be creative with your targeting." Foster smiled. "Creative, sir?" "Paint patterns on their hull with the laser batteries. Spell out words in their language. Make them wonder what we're planning." As the Defiance began drawing pictures on the enemy ship's armor, General Crixthon realized he was facing something entirely outside his experience. The humans weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to confuse, to demoralize, to make his crews doubt everything they thought they knew about warfare. When the first hegemony cruiser finally lost all power and began drifting helplessly, in space, its crew alive but terrified, Crixthon made a decision that would have been unthinkable an hour earlier. "All ships retreat," he ordered. "Sir?" his aide asked in confusion. "You heard me. Full retreat, now." As the hegemony battle group fled toward hyperspace, Morrison stood on his bridge in amazement. They had faced overwhelming odds and not only survived but won decisively. "Damage report," he called out. "Minor hull scoring from the first volley," Commander Phillips reported. "No casualties, all systems operating at full capacity." Morrison shook his head in wonder. They had fought 7 enemy warships and suffered no casualties at all. Lieutenant Foster looked up from her station. "Captain, I'm getting a priority message from Admiral Parker." "Put it through." Admiral Parker's face appeared on the main screen, his expression showing complete disbelief. "Jake, please tell me you really just defeated an entire hegemony battle? Group with 0 casualties." Morrison smiled. "Yes, sir, we did, and I think we're just getting started." News of the Centauri Junction battle spread across the galaxy faster than anyone had expected. Within days, every major space power knew that a single human ship had defeated an entire hegemony battle group without losing a single crew member. Ambassador Zethkar sat in his office on the hegemony homeworld, staring at the battle reports in disbelief. He had laughed at the human prototype just 6 months ago. Now that same ship was making his empire look weak and foolish. "This cannot be accurate," he said to his aide. "One primitive human vessel against 7 of our warships?" His aide nodded, nervously. "The reports have been confirmed by multiple sources, sir. General Crixthon's own recordings show the human ship doing impossible things. Their armor changed shape during the battle. Their weapons learned our firing patterns, and they used some kind of psychological warfare that confused our crews." Zethkar felt a chill run through his body. "What kind of psychological warfare?" "Music, sir. Strange human sounds that disrupted our tactical thinking. And they drew pictures on our ships instead of destroying them. Our crews didn't know how to respond. On Earth, President Kate Williams was meeting with her advisors again. But this time the mood was very different. Admiral Parker actually had a smile on his face as he delivered his report. "The victory at Centauri Junction has changed everything," he said. 3 more alien species have contacted us about defense contracts. The Vesperian Empire wants to study our ship designs. Even some hegemony colonies are sending secret messages asking for our protection." President Williams looked amazed. "All from one battle?" Dr. Elena Torres, the Federation's expert on alien psychology, spoke up. "Madam President, you have to understand how alien minds work. Most species in the galaxy fight wars using pure logic and mathematics. They calculate odds, follow patterns, and make predictable decisions. What Captain Morrison's ship did was completely outside their understanding." "How so?" the President asked. "The aliens expected the Defiants to fight like they would fight. Ship against ship, weapon against weapon, following logical tactics. Instead, the humans fought creatively. They used music as a weapon. They painted pictures on enemy ships. They disabled enemies without killing them. To logical alien minds, this behavior seems almost magical." Meanwhile, in the Nexus Collective's main computer center, artificial intelligences were working frantically to understand the human victory. Thousands of robot minds analyzed the battle data, trying to find logical explanations for what had happened. "Analysis incomplete," the lead AI announced. "Human tactical decisions do not follow any known warfare patterns. Their ship's capabilities exceed documented specifications by impossible margins." A secondary AI responded. "Recommendation: obtain human technology samples for study." Attempted. Infiltration protocols have failed. Human systems appear designed to interface specifically with organic human neural patterns. Artificial intelligences cannot comprehend operational methods. This news was perhaps the most frightening of all. The Nexus Collective's robot minds, capable of processing millions of calculations per second, could not understand how human technology worked. On the other side of the galaxy, the beautiful Vesperian Empire was holding an emergency council meeting. Their graceful, silver-skinned leaders gathered in their crystal palace to discuss the implications of humanity's victory. "The humans have proven they are not as primitive as we believed," the Prime Minister said in her musical voice. "Their ship demonstrated capabilities that our best scientists cannot explain. What concerns me most," said the Defense Minister, "is that they chose mercy over destruction. They could have killed thousands of hegemony soldiers, but they chose to disable their ships instead. This suggests a level of strategic thinking we never expected from them." "Perhaps," said another minister, "we should reconsider our trade policies with Earth." Back in hegemony space, General Crixthon was facing the worst humiliation of his long military career. He stood before the High Command, 7 of the most powerful military leaders in the Empire, trying to explain how he had lost to a single human ship. "The vessel used unknown technology," he reported. "Their armor adapted to our weapons in real time. Their targeting systems learned our patterns faster than we could change them, and they employed psychological tactics that disrupted our crews' ability to think clearly. High Commander Vextar, the supreme military leader of the hegemony, studied the battle recordings with his 6 eyes. This ship must be destroyed before other species realize that our forces can be defeated. Yes, sir, Crixthon agreed. I request permission to deploy the Worldbreaker. Silence filled the chamber. The Worldbreaker was the hegemony's most powerful weapon, a fortress ship capable of destroying entire planets. It had never been used against a single enemy vessel. You believe one human ship requires our ultimate weapon? High Commander Vextar asked. Crixthon's expression was grim. Sir, this is not just about one ship. If word spreads that the hegemony can be defeated, our entire empire could collapse. Subject species might rebel. Our enemies might unite against us. We need to show the galaxy that defeating us was a fluke that will never happen again. The High Command deliberated for hours. Finally, High Commander Vextar made his decision. Very well, you may deploy the Worldbreaker, but this time you will not underestimate the humans. On the USS Defiance, Captain Morrison was reading intelligence reports from across the galaxy. The news was both encouraging and frightening. Jake, Dr. Grant said as she entered his ready room, we're getting messages from rebellion groups in hegemony space. Species that have been oppressed for decades are asking for our help. Morrison looked up from his reports. How many? 17 different species so far. They're calling us the Hope Bringers and the Fear Makers. Our victory has inspired them to believe that the hegemony can be beaten. Morrison felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. Lisa, we won one battle. That doesn't make us galactic liberators. Dr. Grant sat down across from him. Jake, you need to understand what we've done. For 100 years, every species in the galaxy has accepted that the hegemony is unbeatable. They have the biggest ships, the most powerful weapons, the most advanced technology. But we prove that none of that matters if you can't predict your enemy's next move. Commander Phillips entered the ready room, his expression serious. Captain, we're getting reports from our intelligence network. The hegemony is preparing something big. Ship movements suggest they're gathering their most powerful vessels. Morrison stood up and walked to the viewport, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there, alien minds were trying to understand how humans thought and fought. They were studying the battle recordings, analyzing every move the Defiance had made. They're going to come at us with everything they have, he said quietly. Doctor, Grant nodded. The good news is that our systems learned from the first battle too. The ship's adaptive protocols are even more advanced now. The psychological warfare programs have been updated based on what we observed about alien reactions. And the bad news? Morrison asked. The bad news is that they know we exist now. They know we're a threat. Next time, they won't underestimate us. Lieutenant Foster's voice came over the intercom. Captain, we're receiving a priority message from Admiral Parker. Morrison returned to his desk and activated the communication system. Admiral Parker's face appeared on the screen, but his expression was worried. Jake, our deep space sensors have detected massive hegemony ship movements. They're gathering a fleet unlike anything we've ever seen. Intelligence suggests they're preparing to deploy their Worldbreaker. Morrison felt his blood run cold. Every spacefarer in the galaxy had heard stories about the Worldbreaker. It was a legend, a nightmare, a weapon so powerful that entire star systems surrendered rather than face it. Sir, are you certain? Admiral Parker nodded grimly. Satellite reconnaissance confirms it. The fortress ship is moving from its berth in the hegemony core systems. Jake, this thing is the size of a small moon. It has enough firepower to crack planets. Dr. Grant leaned forward. Admiral, how long do we have? Based on their current course and speed, maybe 2 weeks before they reach human space. Jake, I have to ask, do you think the Defiance can handle something like that? Morrison looked at Dr. Grant, who was already running calculations in her head. Her expression was thoughtful, but not hopeless. Sir, Morrison said finally, we won't know until we try. But I can promise you this. We won't go down without a fight. As the communication ended, Morrison realized that their first victory had only been the beginning. The real test was yet to come. Soon, They would face not just superior numbers or better weapons, but the most powerful weapon in hegemony space. The question was whether human creativity and adaptability could overcome a weapon designed to destroy worlds. The USS Defiance hung in space at the edge of the Vegan system, waiting. Captain Morrison stood on the bridge, studying the massive shape that filled most of his tactical display. The world-breaker was even bigger than the reports had suggested. The fortress ship looked like a metal moon, covered with weapon batteries and shield generators. "How many guns does that thing have?" Commander Phillips asked quietly. Lieutenant Foster checked her sensors. "I count over 3,000 weapon ports, sir. And that's just what we can see from this angle." Morrison nodded grimly. Around the world-breaker, 30 hegemony warships formed a protective screen. General Crixthon had learned from his defeat and brought everything he could find. "Captain," Dr. Grant's voice came over the intercom from engineering. "I'm reading some interesting energy signatures from that fortress. Their power systems are massive, but they're also very rigid, built for maximum efficiency, not flexibility." "What does that mean for us?" Morrison asked. "It means they're powerful but predictable. If we can find the right pattern, we might be able to use their own strength against them." What General Crixthon didn't know was that the USS Defiance wasn't alone. Hidden throughout the Vegan system, small ships from a dozen different species were waiting. Rebellion groups from across hegemony space had answered humanity's call for help. Captain Morrison activated his communication system. "All rebel ships. This is Defiance. Remember, your job is not to fight the big ships. Hit their supply lines, their communication relays, anything that supports the main fleet. Let us handle the world breaker." Acknowledgements came back in a dozen different languages, from species that had been oppressed by the hegemony for generations. They had seen what one human ship could do, and they wanted to be part of history. The battle began with the world breaker's massive guns firing at maximum range. Beams of energy powerful enough to melt asteroids lanced toward the Defiance. But Morrison's ship was no longer the same vessel that had fought at Centauri Junction. Dr. Grant's systems had learned and evolved. The Defiance's armor didn't just shift to absorb the energy this time. It began to move in patterns that seemed almost like dancing. The ship twisted and spun through space, its modular plates creating shapes that confused the hegemony targeting computers. "They're trying to lock onto us," Lieutenant Foster reported, "but our movement patterns are making it impossible. Their computers can't predict where we'll be next." General Crixthon watched in growing frustration as his ultimate weapon failed to hit a single human ship. "Increase firing rate. Saturate the entire area." "Sir," his weapons officer replied, "we're already firing at maximum capacity. The fortress cannot fire any faster." That was exactly what Dr. Grant had been waiting. "First Aider Jake," her voice came over the intercom. "Their power grid is locked into a fixed firing pattern. I can see the rhythm of their energy cycles. We can use this." Morrison understood immediately. "Amy, I want you to start firing at the world breaker, but not randomly. Fire in sync with their power cycles." Lieutenant Foster looked confused. "Sir, our weapons aren't powerful enough to hurt that fortress." "We're not trying to destroy it," Morrison explained. "We're trying to create a resonance effect, like a singer breaking a glass with the right note." The Defiance began firing its weapons in a complex pattern that matched the world breaker's power fluctuations. At first, nothing seemed to happen. The human ship's relatively small guns barely scratched the fortress's massive armor. But after several minutes, strange things began to occur aboard the world breaker. Lights flickered in the corridors. Computer screens showed error messages. Most importantly, the giant ship's weapons began firing at slightly different times than intended. "What is happening to our systems?" General Crixthon demanded. His chief engineer studied the readings with growing alarm. "Sir, the human ship is somehow synchronizing with our power grid. They're creating harmonic vibrations that are disrupting our entire electrical system." Meanwhile, the rebel ships were doing their part. Small, fast vessels darted between the hegemony warships, targeting communication arrays and supply ships. They couldn't destroy the big cruisers, but they could blind and confuse them. The hegemony fleet, designed for overwhelming firepower against stationary targets, found itself fighting a completely different kind of war. Enemies appeared and disappeared, like ghosts. Communication between ships became impossible. Supply lines that had functioned perfectly for decades suddenly collapsed. But the USS Defiance had saved its most devastating weapon for last. "Amy," Morrison said to Lieutenant Foster, "activate the new broadcasting system. Let's show them what human creativity really sounds like." Across all frequencies, the Defiance began transmitting human music, not just the jazz they had used before, but every kind of music humanity had ever created. Classical symphonies mixed with rock and roll, folk songs blended with electronic dance music. Poetry was recited over experimental soundscapes. The effect on the hegemony crews was immediate and catastrophic. Alien minds trained for logical, orderly thinking found themselves overwhelmed by the chaotic beauty of human art. Their tactical algorithms couldn't process the random patterns. Their communication systems couldn't filter out the interfering signals. "Make it stop," General Crixthon shouted, but his crew couldn't figure out how. The human transmissions seemed to be coming from everywhere at once. On the Worldbreaker, the resonance effect finally reached its peak. The Fortress ship's massive power grid, pushed beyond its design limits by the harmonic vibrations, began to tear itself apart. Explosions rippled across the metal moon's surface as power conduits overloaded. "Sir," the Worldbreaker's captain reported to General Crixthon, "we're losing structural integrity. The resonance cascade is spreading through the entire ship." Crixthon stared at his displays in disbelief. His ultimate weapon, capable of destroying planets, was being torn apart by vibrations created by one small human ship. "All ships, retreat immediately," he ordered. But it was too late. The hegemony fleet, confused by human music and blinded by rebel attacks, couldn't coordinate an orderly withdrawal. Ships collided with each other as they tried to flee. Others simply shut down their systems rather than continue fighting an enemy they couldn't understand. The Worldbreaker, its power, grid completely destroyed, began breaking apart under its own massive weight. The Fortress ship that had once been the most feared weapon in the galaxy became nothing more than expensive debris floating in space. Captain Morrison watched the enemy fleet scatter in all directions. "Damage report," he called out. "Minor hull, scoring from long-range fire," Commander Phillips reported. "No casualties. All systems operating normally." Morrison shook his head in amazement. They had faced the most powerful weapon in hegemony space and once again suffered no losses. Over the following weeks, the effects of the battle spread throughout the galaxy. The hegemony empire, its ultimate weapon destroyed and its military reputation shattered, began to collapse. Subject species declared independence. Former allies turned into enemies. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for centuries crumbled in a matter of months. The Nexus Collective and the Vesperian Empire, seeing an opportunity, began expanding into former hegemony territory. The galaxy descended into chaos as old. Alliances broke apart and new powers emerged. But humanity had earned something more valuable than territory or resources. They had earned respect. The species once mocked as primitive newcomers were now recognized as the most dangerous and unpredictable military force in the galaxy. Captain Morrison, now promoted to admiral, stood on the bridge of the USS Defiance as it returned to Earth. The ship was no longer unique. Shipyards across human space were building new vessels based on Dr. Grant's revolutionary designs. "Admiral," Commander Phillips said, "we're receiving congratulations from species across the galaxy. They're calling us the Chaos Makers and the Pattern Breakers." Morrison smiled. "Good. Let them remember that humans don't fight the way everyone else does." Dr. Grant joined them on the bridge, looking tired but satisfied. "Jake, do you realize what we've accomplished? We didn't just win a war. We changed the entire galaxy's understanding of what's possible." Morrison nodded, looking out at the stars. "We showed them that bigger isn't always better. That logic isn't always superior to creativity. That sometimes the best way to win is to fight like humans." As Earth grew larger on the view screen, Morrison reflected on their journey. They had started as a laughingstock, mocked for their primitive technology and crude thinking. They had ended as the most feared and respected military force in the galaxy. Most importantly, they had proven that being human wasn't a weakness to be overcome. It was a strength to be embraced. In a galaxy full of logical, predictable species, chaos itself had become humanity's greatest weapon.